Trixie's Forest Retreat. By Crow's Crow. Chapter 108. Research. The second floor, home of the filly-hating ghost. Trixie bit into her cucumber sandwich with a satisfying crisp crunch. She'd have liked it better if she'd gotten something a little less bland, but there was only so much she could expect from Flitter whenever she threw her out among the den of wolves that was the cafeteria lunch line. Beside her, Flitter was staring at her untouched meal. Flitter, to her credit, had been getting just a little bit better. That was to say, once she was finally in the queue, she had stopped nervously slipping her head back to the end of the line. Something which Trixie had praised her endlessly for. However, Trixie had noticed that Flitter hadn't eaten well lately. She preferred to just stare down at her food with a vacant look. It was no use to ask her what was wrong. She never gave a straight answer, but Trixie had a good idea of what it was. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the incident. Starlight still had not shown up for school. Moonrock had taken it upon herself to bring Starlight her homework each day, and sunny days encouraged the class to sign a get-well-soon card. Even Trixie and Flitter had signed it when Sunny came to their desk with it. If it had been anyone but Sunny, Trixie might have thought she was trying to guilt-trip her for saying they weren't really Starlight's friends. The first week, Starlight's absence had worried Trixie just as much as it had worried Flitter. Trixie's thoughts had even been plagued by ridiculous ideas, like apologizing to Starlight for protecting Flitter, or visiting her at home to see how she was doing. Fortunately, Trixie had the good sense to first visit the school nurse, Miss T, to ask about Starlight's condition. Originally, Miss T refused to tell her anything. After all, it wasn't her business, but no mere adult could withstand the great and persuasive puppy dog eyes. After feeding the nurse a tearful story about how worried she was, the nurse relented, and gave what she must have thought to be a reassuring answer to Trixie. Apparently, Starlight was just fine. According to the nurse, though Starlight did have a bloody nose for a day or two, she'd never broken anything. She was just at home to recover from the shock. Trixie took another big, forceful, bite out of her sandwich. She still could hardly believe she'd ever been the least bit concerned for Starlight. All this time, the sooty simpleton had been taking advantage of a convenient excuse to skip school for a while. Trixie had practically given her a vacation, and felt bad about it. She glared out the window, imagining throwing the fool out of it when she got back just to retroactively make her recovery with it. I'll bet she had a good laugh when she saw I signed that card. I totally fell for it. Maybe it was a mistake to tell Flitter. She seems really broken up about it. Wouldn't it make more sense to get angry? It was difficult for Trixie to understand Flitter sometimes. She was so quiet and reserved in public, but blossomed when the two of them were alone. At least, usually she did. But, ever since Trixie had told her about Starlight's trick, she was just so subdued. Moonrock said that Starlight will be back this Friday, Flitter said suddenly. Trixie perked up. She didn't remember Moonrock saying anything of the sort in class. She did. So she's finally stopped faking it then. Flitter's brow furrowed, though she stayed quiet, and just stared at her food. Trixie knew that expression. A few weeks back Flitter had loaned a colt named Dewhill 2 bits, and he'd never paid them back. Most likely he'd just forgotten about it. But every time Flitter spotted him on his own in class or at the lunch table, she'd stare at him, and furrow her brow. Then, when one of his friends joined him, she'd sigh and get on whatever she was doing previously, but as soon as she was alone with Trixie she'd rant, in her own way, about him forgetting the loan. There was no doubt about it, that look meant Flitter had something to say, and felt she had found the perfect moment to say it. If only she could work up the courage to do so before the moment passed. With bated breath, Trixie stayed completely still, afraid that a single motion might make Flitter feel like a moment had passed. Silently, she waited for her friend to spill the beans. Trixie? Flitter asked quietly, hugging her legs against her own body. Are you sure she is faking it? What if the nurse just told you what you wanted to hear? Trixie quirked an eyebrow. I see. So that's what was bugging her. She's worried I'm jumping to conclusions. As if I would ever do that. Trixie is sure that between the nurse and Starlight, Starlight is more likely to lie. Adults don't lie. Besides, you know what she's like. Hey, just think. These past 2 weeks no pony has bothered or teased us. And Starlight has been gone for 2 weeks. Therefore, Trixie would like to think that it must have been Starlight goading them into it. I guess, but... well... you didn't see her cry. It was true. Starlight was still in shock when Trixie had been ushered into the office, and she was gone by the time the professor was done. Only Flitter remained in the hallway. The story Flitter told afterward was that Starlight had broken down crying while Trixie was getting her lecture. Far too kind for her own good, Flitter had tried to help Starlight get to the nurse's office, but was swiftly pushed into a wall for her efforts. After which, Starlight quickly left. No, Trixie said. Trixie has trouble picturing it, to be honest. She stroked a hoof along the brim of her hat nervously. It's just... I dunno. Easier. To think she's just a jerk, I mean. Well, she probably is. Flitter gave her a playful nudge, earning herself a smile from the great and powerful filly. But, that doesn't mean you have to be too. Well, I just think maybe. You really scared her. I was scared, and you were on my side. Trixie isn't sure if those are compliments or not. She threw Flitter a cocky grin. Frowning, Flitter pushed Trixie off balance. You are awful. I meant maybe you scared her straight. Offering no resistance, Trixie sprawled across the floor. Getting comfortable on her back, she gazed up at the clouds through the windows. Okay, fine. I am sorry. I get it. It would be nice if maybe they let us alone now. I won't start anything by saying she faked being hurt. That's what you want, right? Yeah, yes. I'd like that. Maybe we can all just... you know... ignore each other. I wanna be able to eat in the cafeteria again sometimes. What? Without looking over my shoulder. Trixie nodded, bringing her gaze back down towards Flitter. Fine. Trixie didn't realize you weren't satisfied having only the roof and second floor to ourselves. That's not it. It would just be nice, sometimes. She grumbled cutely. Her eyes flicked to the door that led to the professor's office. Isn't your detention almost over? We can stop coming here then. It is. Just 2 more days. Blowing a lock of hair out of her face, Trixie folded her hooves below her head. It was your idea to have our lunch here anyways. Shouldn't you have been scared of the ghost like every pony else? Flitter smirked a little bit. You're the ghost. I don't mind you haunting me. Flitter's face reddened several seconds later, impressing Trixie a bit. It takes a lot of red to get seen through your dark purple coat after all. Mahaha, Trixie laughed, as eerily as she could manage. Is that how a ghost would laugh? Wait, do ghosts laugh? I should find a book or something on that. Where do you suppose we could find one? Flitter? Flitter held her face in her hooves. Her ghostly laughter must have been too scary for her. Well, never mind. You should hurry and eat up. Class starts in a couple minutes. Alright. A reddish glow appeared around Flitter's sandwich. It was an unsteady affair, but she still managed to bring it to her mouth for a bite. Beaming with pride, Trixie clapped her hooves together enthusiastically. That's great, Flitter. You are getting better each time. Within the red aura, Trixie watched the tapestry of Flitter's magic weaving and churning. It was a strange sensation, something she could see, yet not see at the same time. Try to. I dunno. Flow more slowly. Like this? Flitter's muzzle scrunched up while she tried to follow the very vague command. Trixie shook her head. No, That's drag, it's different. It's like, just keep trying stuff. It was frustrating, but she didn't have the words to describe it. So the only solution was to make them up herself, and try to convey what she meant through trial and error. No. Try to, angle it more? No. Him, no. Yeah. No, you lost it. After about the 12th no, Flitter finally managed to change something which the sandwich shook a little bit less. Yes. Trixie cheered. Thanks, it does feel better. Sweat running down her brow, Flitter smiled gratefully at Trixie while she brought her sandwich in for another bite. She managed exactly 2 bites before the aura flickered and Peter read out, dropped the sandwich in her hooves. Are you okay, Flitter? She leaned in, her eyes focused on the Phyllis horn. There wasn't anything she knew of that she could do to help. I'm fine. It's just, really hard to change random things. She wore a much more relaxed expression now that the bread was in her hooves. Oh, do you want Trixie to stop asking you to? Trixie rubbed her fetlocks along her foreleg nervously. Flitter quickly shook her head. No. It really helps. But, it's just hard to change. That's all. I'll learn the other changes, right? They are easy now. Well, as easy as magic can be anyway. I've got the great and powerful Trixie as a tutor, what could be better? She beamed. That's the spirit. Trixie pulled a suddenly squirming Flitter against her and held out one hoof pointed towards the sky. Today levitation. Tomorrow the world. The school bell announced that the world was done waiting for 2 tardier fillies. Trixie will be glad when this is over, she said while climbing the stairs up to the 2nd floor. School was over for the day, but for Trixie that merely meant it was time for detention. Flitter followed alongside her. Me too. It's no fun going home alone. Nodding silently, Trixie paused in front of the door that would lead into the professor's creepy office, staring up at it with a sickly feeling in her stomach. The nerves right before going in are always the worst part, like stage fright. It was nice of Flitter to accompany her there every day. It made Trixie at least a little more at ease, even if she had to leave right after dropping Trixie off. Trixie knew it was inconvenient for Flitter, not to mention frightening for the little scar-ready cat, but she did it anyway. It was great to have a good friend like her. So, Flitter began, scratching her hoof along the floor. This is it, then. I'll see you tomorrow, she said, staring at Trixie expectantly. Trixie snapped back to reality. Of course. She smiled at Flitter and pulled her closer, planting a quick kiss on her cheek. As usual, Flitter didn't return the gesture, but she was just like that. Later, Flitter, she said as confidently as she wished she felt, then entered the office. The heavy door slammed shut behind her, but she only knew that because of the vibrations through the floor. The actual sound was completely gone. Trixie wasn't sure how this spell was performed, but the entire office was deadly silent. She knew she should be hearing Flitter's hoof steps fading away, but it was gone too. As was her own breathing. Even the faint rustle of her hat against her mane each time she moved her head. All of it gone, like she wasn't even there. It never got any easier, even after 2 weeks she was not the least bit used to it. She didn't want to get used to it, that feeling of not existing. Trotting across the office, Trixie saw Professor Silence was already behind his desk. He was not exactly waiting for her. On his desk were today's tests. They were the only thing he had eyes for. The way his quill struck out at the parchment was more like a scalpel than a writing instrument, carving out everything that he deemed wrong with his patient. She nodded respectfully to him, even though he did not appear to be watching. Trixie didn't want to take chances. She sat down on a small stool in front of the desk and waited to be acknowledged. It was a pointless bit of ritual, as it went the exact same each time. He was going to ignore her for a while, then tell her to do the same thing he always did. There was very little she could do for entertainment while she waited. Maybe she'd finally work up the courage and bring the book next time. A school book, of course. There was no way he could object to that, right? She wouldn't be very entertained, but if she just pretended to be, it might annoy the professor enough to hurry up. Bored, she'll let her eyes roam along the office walls. It was still every bit as foreboding as it had been upon first glance, but Trixie found that the longer she looked, the less scary it became. The old globe in the corner was no different from the one they'd used in geography class at her old school. Well, a little dirtier maybe. Similarly, the shelves were still full of books and scrolls. The scrolls were still a mystery, since she wasn't about to grab one, but by now Trixie had had the time to actually read some of the spines. It wasn't quite what she had expected. None of the books were about how to hide your fangs, or endure sunlight. Instead, they were pretty normal books. There was a segment with history books, though Trixie could swear they were just for show. The professor was probably old enough to have witnessed the events. 2 dictionaries, an atlas, and an almanac, all of which looked exceptionally boring. Things picked up a little when Trixie discovered one shelf was dedicated to fiction, and even better, they were all books the librarian wouldn't give to her yet. Books that her mom wouldn't let her read because they were too scary. Even if Trixie wasn't allowed to read the books, she knew of them. They were classic horror stories, with titles such as Dracula, Frankenstein, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, The Raven, and others which Trixie wasn't as familiar with. It was strange to think that the professor actually had a hobby. Trixie had to wonder if he read them like normal ponies, or if he read them and rooted for the monster. But the best books were... where else? On the top shelves. Magic books. Some of them she recognized as their school books, including those for the coming years. Magic 101, Magic 102, but a bit further were titles she couldn't even pronounce. They had odd symbols and letters, or maybe they were another language. Now that she thought about it, that could be what the dictionaries were for. She wanted to get her hooves on those someday. They were no doubt going to be interesting. She caught a blur of motion from the corner of her eye, and quickly dragged her gaze away from the shelves. Without raising his eyes from the parchment, the gloomy stallion gestured towards the crate in the corner of the room. Whatever attention he was affording her waned a moment later. Trixie didn't bother to nod this time. They both knew she was perfectly aware of her task. Stepping in front of the crate, Trixie glared down at her nemesis. The accursed box had been the bane of her existence for 2 weeks. On her first day of detention, she was told to lift the crate up for an hour. If she could do it, her detention would end immediately. She barely managed to lift it for a few seconds the first time. With a smooth motion, she swiped her hat back, and sparked her exposed horn to life. She captured the crate in a gentle glow, then clenched her teeth as she focused on dragging it across the floor towards the middle of the room. How is this still this hard? Every time, she was sure she would have a much easier time with the weight, and every time, she'd sorely overestimated herself somehow. Clenching her teeth, Trixie whirled the crate up into the air, forcing it to slowly rise toward the ceiling. It felt so heavy. Just the mere effort it took her to get it into the air would have killed a lesser pony, or so Trixie liked to think. Today was going to be the day. She had been at this task for 2 weeks. It was downright embarrassing that she still could not do it. She was the great and powerful Trixie, for crying out loud. Over the course of her detention, she had shaved every useless little thread from the telekinesis spell, but that only brought her up to 5 minutes of levitation. A far cry from the hour she required. She practiced day in and day out, which had gotten her another 5 minutes. She had even taken time out of her day to observe other unicorns as they lifted objects around town. Her fellow students, teacher, construction workers, random passerbys as groceries mysteriously fell out of their bags. Trixie had closely observed their magic techniques. It had taken a lot of effort, copying what she deemed usable, refining what worked, experimenting with different approaches she'd seen, and of course practicing even more until she was too exhausted to even use her magic for anything else anymore. She'd even taken to eating lunch with her hooves again just to save up energy. Trixie glared up at the crate as she held it aloft. Sweat already ran down her forehead as she fought to keep her hold on the thing. It didn't make any sense. She was the best. She knew she was the best. Of course, she had thought she was the best 2 weeks ago too, when she could barely push a notebook across a desk. But this was different. She had really worked on this. Originally, it was just about escaping detention early, but now it was personal. It was a battle between the great and powerful Trixie and Kratos. She had decided her nemesis needed a cool name. And she was going to win this time. What time was it? Her legs were getting shaky. She knew that logically it didn't make any sense. She was not actually using them. It had to be at least 40 minutes, right? She really should have blowered a clock to the crate before she started. The important thing was she was doing it. She held the accursed Kratos captive in her gaze through sheer force of will, and momentous effort. She'd never allow him to soil the ground again in her presence. At least not for an hour. She wasn't even tired. Well, not extremely tired anyway. Only like super tired. The clattering sound of a pencil falling to the floor echoed through the otherwise unnaturally silent office. It rolled against her hoof. That couldn't be right. Why was there sound now? Ah, Professor Silence said with a trifling hint of amusement. Miss Lulamoon, would you get it for me? I can't see it from here. He had to be kidding. She was in the middle of something here. Barely suppressing a growl, Trixie quickly glanced away from the crate to glare at the professor. There was a wooden cup on his desk that held numerous pencils. One which Trixie knew had not been there any of the other times she'd been in his office. No sooner had she looked away than she felt the magic holding up the crate falter. Screaming, she leapt out of the way barely a second before the heavy crate slammed into the ground with a deafening thud. Or at least it sounded real loud after not hearing anything at all for a while. Her heart beat in her throat while she stared at the heavy crate, occupying the exact spot she had been just a second ago. That was close. Why was it above her? Did she do that? Wait, how long had it been? There was a clock on the wall behind her she could check. 20 minutes. 20 lousy minutes. That was the fruit of her labor. Open-mouthed, Trixie stared at the lying, dastardly clock. Until she heard Professor Silence clearing his throat. At once, she whirled around and pointed a hoof at him. You. What? Why? The professor looked up from his desk, wearing a disapproving expression. Do try to adhere to the basic rules of sentence structure, Miss Lulamoon. A thin smile played on his lips when Trixie closed her mouth and puffed up her cheeks. Did you acquire the pencil? I do. You sabotaged Trixie. She screamed at the top of her lungs. Rising up from his chair, he leaned forward over the desk. Sabotaged? He echoed, and stared back at her. Besides him, a parchment unfolded while the quill jotted down something that Trixie couldn't see. I merely asked you to pick up a pencil. As he spoke, the pencil raised from the ground, and floated in front of her as though to demonstrate he was speaking the truth. Her blood boiled. In all the time she'd been here, he had never even had a pencil in the room. You don't even use those. You can't just distract Trixie like that. Why? His eyes never strayed from her own. Trixie was quickly coming to realize who she was yelling at, and that this might not be the best of ideas. Still, some far bigger part of her was screaming inside with outrage over being asked such a stupid question right after being nearly killed. Let alone interrupted. Because the spell will fail. You can't do two things at once. The professor stayed quiet, and merely quirked an eyebrow at her. He slumped back into his chair and pressed his hooves together. He seemed to be waiting for something, though Trixie couldn't hazard a guess as to what it could be. The quiet scribbling of the quill was grating Trixie's last nerve. What could he even be writing? They were both just staring at each other. It was strange. Why did he decide to mess with her now? She only had 2 days left. If he was going to mess with her, why not start immediately? And why did that stupid pencil keep floating into her field of view no matter where she craned her neck to look around it? Fed up, Trixie raised a hoof to smack the pencil away, but froze mid-swing. She stared at the floating pencil, while in the background she clearly still heard the pencil scribbling. Slowly panning her gaze back towards the table, she watched the quill dancing across the page. 2. Trixie breathed in disbelief. He wasn't even looking at either of them. She knew for a fact he had locked eyes with her this entire time. An astute observation, he said. The pencil placed itself back into the wooden cup with its brothers, and the quill halted. Did you think yourself master of telekinesis, merely because you could lift a crate? Please, you could not even look away without losing control. Trixie felt her face burn up. Was your mind reading Vamponi after all? Or had he just guessed by her attitude? That's not true. Trixie has carried her books without looking. She stomped her hoof. To Trixie's unending satisfaction, that actually caused the briefest glimpse of surprise to flash across the professor's face. Though he looked disinterested a mere second later, Trixie had already decided she was going to count that as a victory. Trixie will be taking her break now, she announced, then turned to leave the office. She was prepared to ignore him if he tried to tell her to stop, but all she heard while walking away was the sound of the quill resuming its duty. Technically, she had to do anything he told her to do during her detention. She had just assumed the only thing she had to do was lift the crate since he'd never given her any other orders, until today anyway. It was a dirty trick, to make her drop her guard until he could distract her at the last moment. When she thought about it, she couldn't even really object to him doing it again, which just made it even nastier. When she was out of the office, all the sound dropped away again before she could slam the door. She slammed it anyway. Chapter 109. Riled. It was way too early in the morning for Rainbow Dash's tastes. The sun was barely peeking above the horizon. To make matters worse, her earlier hours made it much easier for Celestia to personally torment her every day. The sun just happened to shine in her eyes on her way to work now. Every single time. She began to wonder if saving Equestria twice, hey, the dragon had to count, right? It was huge. Was enough to ask for a slight change in where the sun came up in the morning. She could deal with it after a nice nap, but not in the morning. Especially now that she wasn't getting enough sleep in the first place. Luckily, Dash was prepared for all weather types. If you were looking for a spot in the Wonderbolts you had to be. So, like most mornings since she was promoted, Dash was flying blind. Quite literally, in fact. She had memorized most of the path to the weather office to the point that she didn't really need to see it, and thankfully going to work so early meant it was very unlikely for her to crash into another Pegasus. Of course, this approach to her problem would have been suicide in Cloudsdale. So, chalk one up to living in a mostly Earth pony town. The ironic thing was, in the afternoon Ponyville would be in the shade. At least, until Dash called in the other weather teams to spread out the clouds to their designated areas. Right now, most of Ponyville was overcast by the delivery of rain clouds that arrived the previous evening, but that only covered the actual sky, not the horizon where the blasted sun was tormenting her from. A quick peek down revealed she was just passing over Roselark's flower shop, which meant she was nearly at her destination, the weather team office. She had an hour or so of dull paperwork, then it would be time to make her rounds and get every pony up to date, and then... She shuddered. Anything would be better than another day of this. Would it be wrong to hope for a disaster to strike Ponyville? Nah, she was pretty sure that was a perfectly reasonable thing to wish for. Just a small one, like, maybe if Nightmare Moon came back to turn just mornings into night. Or, the dragon came back for its hoard. Or, the Ursa came back to eat Trixie. Actually, That last one sounded kind of bad, but Dash fully intended to save Trixie, obviously. It wouldn't even be hard. Bears couldn't fly. She could just take Trixie up to a cloud, and keep her there until the Ursa got tired and wandered off. Yeah, that was a great plan. Hopefully it would take a day or two before it gave up, which would give Dash the perfect excuse to just lay on a cloud for 2 days. With Trixie on top of her. On second thought, maybe that wouldn't be quite as naptastic as she'd originally thought. Her cheeks burned. Must be because of the sun, yeah. For completely unrelated reasons, she found herself looking forward to dinner at Applejack's place tonight. She'd really missed hanging out with her friends. Normally, she would have tried to visit Fluttershy's house at the very least, but even just stopping by was more effort than her body was willing to put in at the end of the long days. Honestly, just dragging herself up to her own bedroom was hard enough. She had defaulted to the couch once or twice already. She felt awful for not seeing any pony, especially the pony she was supposed to be mere friends with. But, at least she wouldn't have to feel guilty about it much longer. Trixie would be there. A small smile found its way to her lips as she thought about her. She had not seen her in what felt like years. What was it? A week? 2 days? A month? Too long at any rate. Given how clingy Trixie could be, she felt a little sorry for leaving her alone for so long. Hopefully the dinner would be enough to tie them both over for a while. Besides, it would be fun to see the pusher blowhard try to get through dinner without stepping on any pony's tail. Actually, that was her pusher blowhard now, wasn't it? Should she be telling her friends she was dating her? Meh, it was too much effort to think about. If it came up, then future Dash could be the one to deal with it. However, Fluttershy would be there too. Even if Dash told herself she didn't have time to visit the cottage, that was only partly true. If she really wanted to, she could have made the time, just like she was doing for tonight. Ugh, I am the worst. What am I dodging Fluttershy for? Nothing's really different, right? No, that wasn't true. Something was different, and she knew exactly what it was. Fluttershy had, through setting her up with Trixie, rejected her. But then, Dash always knew that was gonna be an option. Hey, she wasn't even sure if Fluttershy was interested in mares. Not for lack of trying, of course. But if some pony thought it was hard to get Fluttershy to say her own name, they'd never tried to steer a conversation with her toward a personal question. Dash could have sworn Fluttershy was born with bright red fur whenever she even tried to approach the subject. It was impossible. She sure looks cute. Funny that way though, Dash thought aloud with a smirk. Her smile quickly faltered as she felt the familiar stinging feeling in her chest. Dash bit her treacherous lip. She was supposed to keep smiling. She wasn't supposed to be this pathetic. Why did it bother her this much? She knew from the start it might not happen. Were her stupid feelings too stupid to understand that? On the other hoof, it was kind of Fluttershy's fault. She cheated. Everything would have been fine if she'd just let things be. They had a good thing going, right? Sure, just hanging out with Fluttershy hadn't been everything Dash hoped for, but it had been good enough. They had fun, didn't they? Maybe one day she'd even pony up, and tell Fluttershy how she really felt. The aching in Dash's chest got worse. Dash was supposed to get around to bringing it up on her own terms, when she was ready for the consequences. It was unthinkable that Fluttershy would cheat and reject her preemptively like that. But she had, and it hurt. It hurt every time she looked at Fluttershy. She didn't want to feel that way. She didn't want to be forced to fake a smile now. Dash smacked herself across the muzzle as hard as she could. Get a grip. Any less awesome a Pegasus might have sent themselves down into a spiraling crash if they tried that in mid-flight. With pride, Dash reconfirmed she was indeed awesome. Still, her cheeks stung like mad. Maybe next time she'd not hit herself quite that hard. As soon as the thought registered, Dash smacked herself again. No pussing out. This was exactly why she didn't want to be around Fluttershy for a while. She was still her closest friend, but Dash couldn't trust herself not to do something stupid. She was pretty sure she would be perfectly fine in a week. She was too awesome to be broken up for any longer than that, and if that meant using her job as an excuse to avoid seeing her, then fine. She'd be totally over it soon. Though, just as Fluttershy must have planned, Trixie had helped her immensely with that. As annoying, loud, and clingy as Trixie could be, Dash had to admit she really did like spending time with her. Though in hindsight, and with a little help from Rarity, Dash figured out she should probably have offered to go on a date with Trixie, instead of jumping straight to asking Trixie to be her mere friend right off the bat. Apparently that was much more in line with giving some pony a chance. Not that it really mattered at this point. Besides, it was fun. There was no denying Trixie was immensely eager to make the most of their relationship, and her enthusiasm was infectious. So, in a way, it was a really smart thing to do, right? Dash thought so, at least. And she was looking forward to seeing the clingy blue mare again tonight at Applejack's. Actually, I wonder what Trixie will obsess more over tonight, me, or the apple pies. Gosh, those are great. Just thinking about it, ouch. Gah, it stings to talk. Dash rubbed her sore cheek. If she'd hit herself any harder, she might have had trouble stuffing her face with apple pie tonight. What was she even thinking when she accepted that invitation for dinner? It made it obvious that she could make time if she wanted to. So much for avoiding Fluttershy. Meh, she was probably overthinking this whole dinner thing. It wasn't as if she was expected to be alone with Fluttershy tonight. Though she probably would have to talk to her. Fluttershy would want to hear all about her new job. As would every pony else for that matter. Dash hoped they were prepared for a long round. Actually, that was going to be awesome. There was no way the week she was having wasn't the worst week in history, but that also meant she could use it to outdo Trixie and Applejack in their toughest job contest. Dash felt a grin creep along her lips. It didn't make up for all the lousy work, but it was a small point of light in the dark that she was going to milk for all it was worth. Trixie and AJ would have to admit defeat and shut up, and Fluttershy would probably try to make her feel better. Daydreaming was a great pastime. Before she knew it, Dash found herself landing in front of the weather management office. Slowly, she set one hoof against the door, taking a deep breath. She was solemnly aware it would be her last gasp before work officially started. Then, she pushed the door open. Ah! A loud, piercing scream tore through the tranquil skies. That sounds like Twilight. Dash took a moment to admire just how much lung capacity an out-of-shape librarian like Twilight had, as the scream had yet to stop. Then, Dash realized just what this scream meant. Oh yeah. Score. Dash looped into the air, hoof pumping in victory. A scream like that could only mean something was wrong. Sweet. Oh. She managed to abort her victory dance halfway through the second routine, as a couple of ponies were staring at her from the ground. I better go see what's wrong. She launched herself away from the boring paperwork, and toward long-awaited adventure. At breakneck speeds, Dash crashed through the window and tumbled into the library, taking out a few shelves of books along the way for good measure. Dramatic entrances to help screaming ponies needed things like that, she reasoned. Though, oddly enough, the screaming had stopped. Guess she must have run out of steam. Twilight. Spike. Hello. She called out while trotting through the library. Everything seemed to be in order, minus her awesome entrance. She had kind of expected to find some giant hole in the wall, or ominous-looking giant crystal in the middle of the room, or something. Her ears perked up at a faint stumbling sound coming from below. It rapidly got louder until the basement door slammed open, revealing a disheveled Twilight. Right behind her was a wheezing, thoroughly out-of-breath Spike. If Dash had to guess, he was responsible for getting her to stop screaming. Before Dash could say anything, Twilight noticed her and yelled, "It's gone." She took it. Tilting her head in confusion, Dash asked, took what?" Whoa! In a split second, Twilight was upon her and shook her by the shoulders. This had to be a really big deal if Twilight was this out of whack. Maybe some pony had stolen an ancient artifact, and Twilight was tasked with catching the culprit, who was zooming away at speeds only a Pegasus like Dash could catch up to. Maybe she'd lost some awesome, secret amulet that makes a pony faster than ever. Maybe. Twilight pressed her face uncomfortably up against Dash's own as she spoke. The book. There's no telling what she... Rainbow Dash, you okay? Good. Did you see her? We have got to find her right now. Before it's too late. And just like that, Dash practically felt her eyes glaze over with disinterest. Wait. This is about a late book? Twilight, come on. I thought there was a real problem. She sighed with crushing disappointment. It is a real problem. Do you have any idea what Princess Celestia will do to me if she finds out I let this happen? Twilight yelled and pushed herself away from Dash, then ran towards the front door. Quick! Maybe we can still catch her in time. Just great. A real disaster would have been a valid reason to blow off work, but this was just a minor nuisance. One that only made her late for work. Her schedule. Oh Celestia, the Rainbow Dash had a schedule. Was already tight as it was if she wanted to be able to fit in dinner at the Apples farm. Look, Twi, I don't have time for this. Do you have any idea how many weather forms are waiting for me right now? I swear, they multiply if they're left alone for 5 minutes. I gotta get going. Screeching to a halt by the library entrance, Twilight flung open the door. What? No, you don't understand. It's... never mind. No time. Without another word, she raced off faster than Dash had ever seen her run before. Huh? That egghead has some moves if it comes to her books. Oh, hey, Spike. You okay there? She waved at the panting, dragon-shaped rug that lay on the floor. A single reptilian eye moved to look at her, but nothing else. Yeah, you are fine. Hey, could you tell Twilight I don't need those books anymore? Thanks pal, catch you later. She briefly considered taking the door, but it only felt right to take the window out again. It must have been nice to have a cushy librarian job, if Twilight could afford to freak out over a late book. What did Twilight actually do all day? Sleep in the library? That's what Dash would do anyway. It sounded like a dream job. Literally. Letting out a heavy sigh, Dash pushed open the door to her office. She nearly tripped over the pile of mail that was heaped on the floor. Gah. Huh. I guess I can just use it in the storage night. Future Dash has all the luck. She gave one last look out toward the ever-free forest, hoping she might see something blue and sparkly moving through the trees. Sadly, all of Ponyville was peaceful and quiet. Too bad, she'd really had her heart set on the 2-day cloud camp out with Trixie. Though, now that she thought about it, she wasn't sure how Trixie would actually react to meeting the Ursa again. Although Trixie never said anything about them, it was no secret that she still had terrible nightmares. Dash and Fluttershy had agreed not to talk to Trixie about it unless Trixie brought it up first. They had to be about the Ursa, right? Going through that had to terrify almost any pony. And no matter how Trixie boasted, she was a lot more sensitive than she liked to let on. How would Trixie react to seeing it again? Dash felt her chest tighten as she tried to picture her ideal napping scenario again, on a cloud above the Ursa. Except, this time it featured a mortified Trixie that held onto her for dear life, begging Dash not to drop her. Biting her lip, Rainbow Dash dragged her gaze away from the ever-free forest. You know, another boring day isn't so bad, she muttered while she stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind her. The first rays of sunshine tried to worm their way through the stalwart cloth that shielded the cozy bedroom from the world outside. Their best efforts formed mere inoffensive pinpricks of light that speckled the dark cloth, and would never have been able to stir even a light sleeper from her slumber, nor offend the eyes of a weakened patient. In the tranquility, two ponies lay curled up against one another, though only one of them was actually asleep. Trixie peeked at Fluttershy from between her eyelashes, certain the mare would wake soon. If not awoken by time, then by something, or some pony, else. Sooner or later, Twilight would discover that the book was missing. In fact, Trixie was sure she had heard a faint echo of a scream reverberate just a little while ago. Honestly, it had been remarkably easy to break into the library. Some of the windows weren't even closed. That had initially smelled like the most obvious of traps, but in truth, whoever was in charge of the library's security was merely oblivious. Trixie supposed that would change after last night. Trixie carefully ran a hoof from Fluttershy's shoulder down to her elbow, and smiled as she watched Fluttershy mumble in her sleep. Whatever reaction Twilight might have, Trixie didn't have to deal with it just yet, allowing her time to just appreciate her good fortune. Oddly, ever since Trixie snuck back into bed, Fluttershy had not attempted to eat her mane again. Granted, Trixie had not slept either, so maybe Fluttershy only attacked when she was asleep. That was weird. A loud banging on the front door shattered the stillness, quickly followed by Twilight Sparkle's voice. "Trixie. I know you're in there." She sounds a little agitated. Trixie closed her eyes and prepared to look groggy when she felt Fluttershy stir. She had to pretend as though she was only just waking up as well after all. Perhaps she ought to feel more nervous, but she had spent the last 4 hours perfecting her alibi, and planning out how to reason Twilight away from immediate suspicion. It would be simple. Just a little. Fluttershy mumbled, and nuzzled against Trixie, trying to retreat back into dreamland. Another shout outside shook the windows. "Open this door. Fluttershy. Are you okay?" It must have gotten through to Fluttershy as she startled awake. Twilight? There was another brief moment of quiet, then Fluttershy squeaked and rapidly pulled her hooves away from Trixie. Oh. Trixie knew it was bound to end, but she was still disappointed to feel Fluttershy retreat. Opening one eye, she watched Fluttershy slip out of bed and drop toward the window. Ugh. It's too early. What does she want? Trixie does not wish to be disturbed. Although she said that, she still rolled out of bed and trotted towards the stairs. Loud, angry hoofbeats could be heard from downstairs as Twilight continued to yell up for Fluttershy. "Trixie will go save the door." She faked a yawn, grumbling a little as she made her way to the bedroom's doorway. Meanwhile, Fluttershy pushed aside the makeshift curtain, and opened the window. Twilight. Is something wrong?" It was simple for Trixie to detect the tone of fear in Fluttershy's voice. Twilight showing up at her doorstep at the crack of dawn was probably official element of Harmony business, or at least some sort of animal-related emergency. Either way, it probably would involve something scary. "Fluttershy. You're okay. Where is Trixie?" Pausing at the bedroom doorway, Trixie briefly looked back to Fluttershy when she heard that question. Trixie? Well. She's, around." Fluttershy's face turned bright red as she stumbled over her words, searching desperately for some answer to the question without having to say they were both in the bedroom. "Around? That's not. Look, never mind. Just don't move from that spot, I'm coming in." Trixie wasn't quite sure what Twilight's plan was, but it struck her as an excellent idea to hurry up and open the door before it got blasted off its hinges. With a quick sprint to get herself line of sight on the door, and a hint of magic, she unlocked it. Another quick tug of her magic opened it. When a blast of arcane death didn't immediately shoot through the door, Trixie decided to carefully approach. Twilight stood a few paces away from the door, looking clearly surprised when it just opened on its own. The glowing of her horn betrayed she had been in the middle of casting something. It was difficult for Trixie to tell from so far away what exact spell, but it looked suitably advanced for Celestra's student. It didn't look like anything destructive, but perhaps some form of teleportation? Stepping off the staircase, Trixie gave Twilight a confused look. Twilight? Trixie's here. Is some. Whoa. With a flash, Twilight was suddenly about half a straw's breadth away from Trixie's face. There was a stray twitch in Twilight's right eye. Where is it? Flinching away, Trixie tried to force her throbbing heart back down out of her throat. Some part of her brain couldn't help but point out she had made the right read. Teleportation. Nailed it.